Hello and welcome to English Lectures by Usman, Hanif, Saqi. First of all, I would like you to subscribe my channel and press the bell icon. Uh, Today we are supposed to discuss Geoffrey Chaucer and Canterbury Tales. Uh, since it's part of BS syllabus as well as MA English syllabus, it's pretty important to study this person and this poem. First of all, before going into what Canterbury Tales is all about, let us first of all try to know who is Geoffrey Chaucer. He was born in 1342 or 1343. There is ambiguity regarding his year of birth, but recently the research has come out that he was born in 1328, which is pretty much revealing. But since today's research, modern days research is very rigorous, thought to be very rigorous, we are bound to obey it. So it could be 1342, 1343 or 1328. He was born in one of these years, okay? And he died in 1400. So he was a 14th century Middle English poet. The time that he lived in is called Middle English or medieval era, okay? Medieval, it's middle era. There was an Old English, there is Modern English, and there is Middle English. Middle English is the one which he dealt. Chaucer was not only an author but a bureaucrat and a courtier. He was a man of court. He was an aristocrat. He worked with the king on different assignments, and alongside he wrote his poetry. Before Chaucer, there was no particular poetry in writing in English language. Remember, most of the writings in Chaucer's era were done in Latin language, and Latin language was language of religion, and command over language, over written language, was only had by the popes or bishops or parsons. Only religious people could read or write. So most of the people were illiterate; they could not write anything, and those who were literate, they were religious people. And the religious people did not have anything to do with the English language. They were concerned with Latin language because Latin language was language of religion. So the common masses were only speaking English language, and even they could not write English language much. And there was no praiseworthy content being created in English language. So he was the first to write English poetry. That's why he is also called father of English poetry. Okay. Before Chaucer, there is no much noteworthy content created by the poets. Chaucer was buried in Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey, where other poets of name are also buried. Let's talk about Chaucer's strengths. His character development, or the way he develops his characters, is really hallmark feature of his personality. When we start reading Canterbury Tales, we will see that he develops his character in a very wholesome manner. For example, he gives their physical description and he tells us about their supposed occupation, and then he tells us what he actually is doing. For example, I'll give you example. 29 people were accompanied by Chaucer, and while they were on the move, while they were on their journey towards shrine. These 29 people belong to different professions, and they were going for religious occasion, religious celebration, and most of them were such characters that their life did not match with religion. They were extremely irreligious people. So on one side he talks about a religious person, and then when he talks about his actions, there is a contrast. In this way he develops his characters. He uses physical description and a realistic depiction. He tells us reality. One of the questions that is oftly asked in Punjab University's papers is Chaucer's art of realism. He describes reality. As G.B. Shah once said, that I don't have my brains above my eyes, I describe what I see. So Chaucer describes what he sees. Canterbury Tales is called Magnum Opus. Now, what is Magnum Opus? Any published work is magnum opus if it is of tremendous value, if it is representative creation of the writer. So people know Chaucer because of Canterbury Tales. He was born in 14th century, and in 21st century we are talking about him. It means he really made some impact, and we are talking about him because of Canterbury Tales, which is a magnum opus. It was said that he was inspired by Boccaccio to write narrative poetry. So he had an inspiration. Some people pronounce it Boccaccio, and some people pronounce it Boccaccio. Okay, you can choose whatever you like. I want to tell you what that Canterbury Tales revolve around. It revolves around 29 pilgrims who decide to make a pilgrimage to Saint Thomas Becket's shrine. Now, Saint Thomas Becket was a very famous religious figure in those days in 14th century England, and from Canterbury they go to Saint Thomas Becket's shrine, and these two places are 55 miles apart. And what is decided is that, including Chaucer, there were 30 people, so everyone was required to tell 4 stories each. 2 stories while going towards the shrine and 2 while getting back. So in other words, 120 stories had to be told in all. But life could not support him. He died before completing that long epic poem of his. So he was able to write down only 24 stories. In this way, we can say that it was an incomplete poem. It was an incomplete long narrative poem. Despite being incomplete, it was not small in length. So they also decided that only that person will get the prize who tells the best tale out of them. And the place where they are supposed to stay is called Tabard Inn. Chaucer wrote only 24 tales, and Chaucer's pilgrims represent all classes and professions in medieval era of England. The most wholesome work is always that which can include all people of all classes, which is inclusive, which has an inclusive approach. So Chaucer's characters are not taken from one area only. In those days, language in writing was a luxury that only religious people had. Common masses did not have approach to reading anything, because they did not know how to read. Because they had no idea about Latin language. They knew English language, but nobody was ready to write in English language. So Chaucer decided to write in English. In this way, he also put some rivalry to his contenders. If we talk about the characters produced by Chaucer, I can name a few. There was knight, there was squire, there was clerk, there was cook, there was man of law. So you could see they were from different professions and areas of life. Prioress was there, friar, summoner. The pilgrims were not religious people in the true sense of the term, because they had not completely devoted their lives to religion. They were common people just like you and I. Some of the people were even hypocrite. We can also say that with Chaucer, modern English literature really begins, because before him nobody was ready to write in English. Most of the writings were in Latin, and those were religious writings. That literature was religious literature. Now English has developed, and in his time it was only mostly spoken form of language. We are living in 21st century. English has developed a lot, but in Chaucer's time English was not very much developed. It was mostly spoken only, and it was not standardized. It had not reached into its true color yet, and it was called Middle English language, and it was considered the language of lower classes. Latin language used to be considered the language of elite classes, and nobody was ready to write in English language, because English was considered the language of lower class. And Chaucer, despite being an aristocrat and a rich man and a person of high class, elite class, he decided to write in the language of common people, commoners, which made him really famous. And he was a man of a man who was humane, who loved humanity, and he wanted to entertain the people. Chaucer wrote in language that people spoke. So, spoken language was coming into written form for the first time. The next slide says that this poem is almost an epic poem. Why do we call Chaucer's work as epic work? Because it's of big magnitude, big size, big length. It was not a small poem, despite being remaining incomplete. It is of epic size, right? Chaucer writes poems like a bard. Bard is a person who sings folklores in the streets and pleases people. He wanted to please people and entertain people. Chaucer had this great sensibility that when he tells the tales, when he describes the 30 personalities, including himself, he can take 30 perspectives, 30 angles, 30 points of views. So he can really step into the shoes of his characters and really comes up with those attitudes that they're supposed to do, right? So all his characters seem unique and they are true to themselves. Okay, for a character to be believable, he must be true to himself. So it was his extreme level of sensibility that he was able to step into their shoes and produce their perspectives and angles and points of views. And I have already told you that his contemporaries were writing in Latin language, and when he became the torch bearer of writing, of becoming the first person to write in English language, it attacked his rivals and they turned against him. And as they should, we will go on and on talking about Chaucer in the coming lectures. Stay tuned, and I would request you to subscribe the channel. Thank you.